Welcome to the future of payroll and workforce management insights by HR.com, your go-to resource for insights into payroll and workforce management. From navigating compliance and technology trends to exploring the latest in global payroll solutions, we're here to keep you ahead of the curve. Join us as we dive into the forces reshaping payroll and share practical strategies to optimize your workforce management. Let's get started. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Future of Payroll and Workforce Management here at HR.com, where I am Brent Skinner, your host, and I am also the executive community leader of Future of Payroll here at HR.com, where I do many other things, but enough about me. My guest today is Michael Custers from Worx. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, great to be here. Thank you, Brent.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest on the podcast. Very excited about today's topic. We're going to be talking about being, focusing on Europe, specifically as a strategy for an HCM company and all sorts of interesting things around that. But first, as I like to ask all my guests, and I will ask you, everyone seems to have a passion in this space when it comes to the world of work. I don't think I've come across one single person yet on the podcast who doesn't have something that really galvanizes and something that really gets them going every day to work in the world of work and to lead in this space. So I'm curious, what gets you motivated every day in this space, Michael?
So I've been in this space for the last 20 years, so surely there's got to be something. And if I come to reflect on it, it's really, I think it's the fact that work is such a big part of life. If you come to think of it, you 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, you spend quite a bit of time on this and helping to shape that, whether it's your own job or helping to enable that for people is actually a very cool thing to do. So I find there's a lot of value in helping to shape the world of work by making it more efficient, by making it more fluent, by making it more digital, by making it more interesting. So it's a world that keeps fascinating.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that because I too have been in this space for about 20 years, and we'll let the audience in on a little clue. You and I met briefly, albeit about 15 years ago. Perish the thought, in very different lives, still in HCM, and so it's really really exciting to reconnect with you. And I share your sentiment there. We spend so much time in the world of work as workers. Employees, it matters. It's not something to just kind of keep to the side while we focus on the rest of our life. It is part of our life. It's integrated. Now, about our topic today, we're going to talk a little bit about, well, a lot about becoming the idea of becoming a European champion instead of a global generalist, and just the value or the wisdom in focusing in maybe on one region of the world as opposed to being all things to all people and getting really, really good in a more narrow focus. And why don't we start it off this way? Why a European champion strategy for Worx over, say, global payroll? Where does it create measurable customer value that maybe being more of an overall global payroll specialist wouldn't, or differently?
So there's a couple of points. If you simply look at Europe, at payroll providers in Europe, you see that there's either domestic champions, so payroll providers who are very strong in a single geography, or global champions or global providers, people who actually provide payroll on a global scale. What there's not is sort of a pan-European provider of European origin who really embraces the complexity of Europe. And that brings me to so in a way, the first point I want to highlight is you can argue there's a vacancy in the market for a European champion. No one really claimed that position. The second thing is you can argue about Europe, about the different levels and the complexity of legislation, the languages, the cultural differences, and you can love it or hate it, but in any case, it's there and it's not going to go away. And it's not going to get very simple. And I hope, and I think and probably in the next 100 years, this level of complexity will remain. But at the same time, you see that Europe increasingly is coming together, and a lot of the legislation is no longer born out of national parliaments, but out of the European legislation, and then being sprinkled over all the different member states of the European Union. So there's on the one hand that complexity that you have to embrace in a way from a language and a cultural and a institutional perspective, and on the other hand, there's legislation which is increasingly becoming more uniform. And we believe that you have to be fully focused on that ecosystem, that environment to fully embrace that. And that's the thesis of really what we want to try to achieve it as it works. On the one hand, put that full focus on Europe and everything which is there. But on the other hand, also making sure that we cover all of Europe, that it's not just a matter of, we do Europe and basically you cover UK and France and Germany, you cover the big geographies. No, Europe is 27 European member states plus Norway, UK, Switzerland, a couple of other countries at the fringes of Europe. For us, it's really the matter of developing that deep in-country capability for every country across Europe.
Yeah. You mentioned something that I just want to sort of underscore here is that what I'm inferring is that I think implicit in what you said was there's a colloquial meaning when someone says they cover all of Europe, and then there's actually technically officially covering all of Europe, and those are two vastly different things from what I understanding from what you say. Um, and that's interesting. That's very interesting. And and just from a more of a philosophical standpoint as well, right? In many things, it's really important, or it's advantageous, maybe preferable to really focus and go deep in one area as opposed to trying to be all things to all people. And I think that I'm hearing that too in what you're describing, and that I would say that is very wise. Um, Another question I have for you is, um, how do acquisitions and the aggregation core of an HR layer work in practice? From data flow integration to scaling a single country client across borders. Like, how does this work technically, Michael? Like, how does SD works? No pun intended. Sorry. How does it make it work? There's one thing to talk about it, but there must be sort of like there's a process, a workflow involved here, right?
Yeah. So let me talk about it conceptually before I get to the technology first. A lot of the payroll aggregators in the past have started from this abstract concept of payroll. We flipped it around and basically from aggregation layer work their way up and down to the domestic payroll. Now, where the action is, where the errors happen, where the delivery of the payroll actually is on that domestic level. And so we flipped that script around and we said we start from the domestic payroll because that's really where you need to deliver, where you have white collar workers and blue collar workers, and the entire population is in a country. Let's make sure that is 100% accurate and then build an aggregation layer on top. And so basically, our entire business is built around deep in country compliance and expertise. And then when we get that done, in-house. So typically we like, and the reason why we acquire businesses is because we believe we need to have that entire value chain in-house and our own ownership. And then we basically work our way up towards the aggregation layer. And the aggregation layer combines all of the different data that are being produced locally. Now, there's two things in there. It's we've stepped a little bit away from partnerships in order to really have in-house capability, meaning we have in Croatia, in Spain, in Finland, in Romania, we have a local payroll engine operated by local people who have 10, 20, 25, 30 years of experience with that local legislation and with that local setup. And that for us is the core of how things work. And then if there's a lot of technology that you then can use to extract the relevant data and put it on an aggregation layer to put it into a reporting or into a global HCM or wherever you want to put it. But for us, the core, and it comes back also in the complexity and all of the idiosyncrasies of Europe, the core is really on the local level. And then if you get that done right, aggregating and it's not very hard. Whereas if you flip it around and you do aggregation across, I don't know, 20, 25 different data fields, you lose a lot of the local complexity. And it's on that level of local complexity, typically things go wrong. And as you know, Brent, one thing you don't want to happen with payroll is things going wrong. So we really start from that local level, work our way up, and then aggregate on that level instead of starting from aggregation and working our way down. It may sound as a philosophical or conceptual difference, but it makes a world of difference because it's really the difference is where you put the weight of the business, where you put the focus, the responsibility, and the investment. And it's really on the local level. And then if the local level works well, the aggregation will happen for sure.
Yeah, as opposed to trying, I might be mangling this a little bit, but as opposed to trying to apply the aggregation to the local level
Exactly.
from the top
Exactly.
down. Yeah,
Because
yeah,
then you're
yeah, yeah.
getting frustrated about the missing fields that are local and how come you do this sort of tax in this country or that sort of tax in that country. You have to embrace it. These are systems, these are employment conditions, collective labor agreements, things that have been around not just for the last 5 or 10 years, but in some cases for 50 or even 100 years before there were things like payroll. These are institutional things which are ingrained in the national legislations of countries, and they happen to be part of payroll today. And you have to accept it. And you can get frustrated around it because of the fact that it's been there, but it's there. And so you got to deal with it.
Well, the other thing that's really interesting here is that what I'm hearing is that SD Works really is deliberate and takes its time in getting every new local provider, local payroll provider, we'll call it for that, the LPPs and others, ready, like to get them ready for to be eventually brought into the fold. Am I hearing this right?
Uh, So we do it with an acquisition, and then we typically go through 2, 3 years of integration. And the integration is not so much on the payroll level because, as I pointed out, the local payroll and compliance knowledge is already there. It's more on
Right.
the systems, it's more on the connectivity and on the cultural level. So basically, it's pulling the local teams into a more European logic and culture and enterprise setup. And with partners, we typically do the same, but ideally we do it with our own teams. When we acquire a business, then we also typically rebrand them. We make them part of the European story, and it creates this sort of common sense of responsibility and this common framework and this common reference. And people feel part of a European story, not just of a country story anymore. And we do the same with partners in countries where we are not present. But today, look, we have a capability in 20 countries across Europe with local payrolls, with local experts, working with the local social security and pensions administrations in all of these 20 countries. We hope to grow that to 25-ish countries in the next few years. And I think at that point, we can really say that we cover all of Europe, or at least all of the countries in Europe with more than 3 or 4 million inhabitants.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Now, when we spoke about this earlier in the green room, we have a green room here at this podcast, even though we're not a late night TV talk show. But in any event, we talked about there's sort of there's a method behind this also for SD Works in terms of focusing, I think, narrowly on pay, time, and benefits.
Yeah.
Could you uh, now, obviously, there's the idea that you could cover the full breadth of HCM or the royal you, like anyone who might decide to do this, right? To cover the full breadth of HCM. But you talked about some very specific reasons. There's a rationale behind focusing specifically and solely, at least for the time being, maybe in perpetuity, on payroll, time, and benefits. And forgive me if I'm missing a piece there.
So so it's payroll, time, benefits, and we see benefits as part of payroll because it's another way of rewarding people, and then also HR. But I think that the thing that the three have in common is the fact that they're all driven by legislation. They're all driven by compliance. And so basically, these things are influenced by typically 150 or 200 lawmakers in any given country or democracy that vote for different ways of taxing people or different ways of calculating social security contributions. But that is the constant change that is in there. And you see that payroll, on the one hand, they have this drive for continuity. On the flip side, it's a process that is constantly being bombarded by legal changes on multiple levels, national legislation, European legislation, unions, collective labor agreements. So it's this constant drive for compliance that binds them together, is one thing. The other thing is also they're interdependent, meaning you need HR data and time data to calculate payroll. And then you need the payroll data to go back into HR in order to form a frame of reference for your word policy. So the three processes are tightly integrated. And so therefore we stay a bit further away from, we do some talent processes, we do some recruitment, but the core of the business is really workforce management, HR and payroll together because they're this closely knit unit. They're like a compliance driven operating machine within HR. It's the beating heart of HR. It may not always be the most glamorous. It may sometimes even be a bit boring, but it's essential. It's where if things go wrong there, they go wrong everywhere. And this is the big difference with some of the other HR processes. Recruitment, super important. Talent strategy, super important. Learning, talent development, super important. But they're less driven by compliance. They are in a certain number of cases, but they're less integrated with each other. And this is the reason, and in particular in this European context, if you can get that trifecta of HR, payroll, and time to work together in 25 countries across Europe, I think you have something very cool. It's like a European HR operating machine that you can realize. That's
Yeah,
what
and you
and
can
that's what we're after.
Yeah, and you can build off that. So the idea is to get that, we'll call it the core, even though when we say the core, we might think core HR, but we'll think of this in this trifecta, or these, the HRIS, the payroll, time, and benefits, right? Consider this to be the core. And you can, if you have that core if that's very solid and working like a well-oiled machine, then you can more easily and more readily pipe other things into that from other vendors of your choice for, say, learning or performance or whatnot. That's what I'm hearing, and that's very smart. Um, what's next with trends like autonomous payroll, flexible benefits, AI, all this kind of stuff? How does SD see the future when it comes to this pan-European Europe focus?
We're super upbeat and positive about Europe. You hear a lot of debate. Europeans are actually, this is one of the things Europeans do very well. It's beat themselves a little bit up. And so they like to be sometimes negative, but I think overall, I'm super, super positive about the European market space because you see that it's slowly but surely things are coming together and becoming more and better integrated. Now, speaking a little bit about the things that you mentioned, Brent, in terms of benefits, I see a big wave of development coming up. Why? Because the ongoing tax pressures in Europe give way to a drive for other ways of rewarding. Combine that with a need for further personalization, I think you'll see a lot of European countries take a page out of the US playbook from a benefits perspective and start developing much more personalized, flexible benefits. The things that you have known in the US for many years, you will see that being introduced in a lot of European countries with more contributions towards pensions, towards certain sort of health insurance, towards other things being part of the salary package of an employee. And I think um, payroll providers across Europe will have to develop that capability if they want to stay in the game. And so I think that
Mhm.
that is a big development for sure. On the AI side, it will contribute, in my view, on two levels. Even further automation. Payroll in many countries is already deeply automated, will really lead us to AI agent within payroll to drive next waves of automation. And also on knowledge and the compliance side, it will really create that type of transparency across Europe that we've all been waiting for. Suppose I run a 300 people a Polish workforce, but I have 30 guys working in Denmark, and I want to know about the latest um, time and attendance legal change in Denmark. Well, AI will allow us to actually consume those changes in Polish, the minute they are being published by the local lawmakers. And so that will create a level of AI as such will create a level of transparency on your compliance and legislation that we haven't seen before. I think that's pretty promising. I think if you can embed these things into your technology stacks and create a really build them into your operating model as a payroll provider, then I think that the future will look bright.
Yeah, it's a really exciting time to be in HCM, and in sort of enterprise software in general, but especially HCM, the world of work, and how AI is helping to shape that, and really make things easier in many ways, and also open up opportunities that heretofore might not have been all that possible. Um, Michael, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. This is really interesting and illuminating, and I'm glad that we had an opportunity to discuss this.
Super. Thank you very much for putting a spotlight on Europe. It's been super appreciated.
Thanks for tuning in to the Future of Workforce Management and Payroll Insights by HR.com. We hope today's episode brought you valuable insights and fresh perspectives on the future of payroll and workforce management. Be sure to check out more episodes and explore resources at hr.com/podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. Until next time, keep innovating and making a difference in the world of payroll and workforce management.